Hi, I'm attorney Greg Dell, joined by attorney Cesar Gavidia. And Cesar, we're going to talk about a recent victory you had against Unum on a business overhead policy on behalf of a chiropractor who had a heart attack and then ended up not getting his full business overhead benefit paid. So talk to us a little bit about the background of this case and what you were able to do for this particular client.
I really like when we get some of these real unique cases and issues, and sometimes it's not necessarily on the medical merits. It's about policy language and contract interpretation. And, these terms that appear in these disability policies, business overhead policies, they're operational terms. They mean something, they're defined a certain way, and then sometimes these terms aren't defined at all in these policies. That's kind of the issue here that our client had, who, as you said, was a chiropractor. He had a heart attack. Had a business, a chiropractic office that he worked out of, and he was a chiropractor there, the main doctor, treating patients, doing the daily adjustments of patients, consulting with patients. And after his heart attack, he could no longer continue doing that. He still went in. He tried to have a few other doctors come in and fill in, and he still had a staff there, and they still tried to keep the office running and open as long as they could. And it wasn't too long, because before long, and as you know, many people, when they want to be seen by a particular doctor, that's who they want to be seen by. Sometimes the person you bring in, it just doesn't work. It's not going to work to keep the business functioning and running. And that's kind of what happened here. Before long, he had to end up closing the doors on his practice. He'd been collecting his individual disability benefits. He'd been collecting his business overhead expense benefits. And what Unum was doing with those business overhead expense benefits, for some people that kind of may not know exactly how that functions, is it's supposed to reimburse for expenses incurred by the business in the normal operation of the business. Now, because a business shuts down or closes its doors does not mean that there are not still normal operation expenses. And that's what he continued to incur even after he closed the business.
Right, because perfect example would be you have a lease.
Right.
On a building. Just because you shut the business down doesn't mean that the landlord is going to say, oh, don't pay us the rent.
You have the lease on the utilities, or the bills on the utilities. You have, patient files.
Yeah,
You have somebody there to have to take ongoing calls to be able to refer patients out. And these are the things that continued going on. So he still had to keep going in for many months after that to keep kind of these things taken care of. But Unum didn't see that, in their view, the business was operational. And they came up with this term, operational. Okay. And that's the reason they stopped benefits. They said, well, we don't pay business overhead expense benefits unless the business is operational. But the policy never described that term, operational. It was never in the policy at all. It was something, in fact, that they added into their letter. It did say, we will reimburse for normal business expenses incurred in operating your business. Well, he was still operating his business. He still had obligations and things that needed to be met. So I thought that was a really interesting issue that, and you don't see those sorts of things too often, where they just blatantly add a term into a decision letter. And some people look at it and may say, well, that looks close enough to this term, and maybe they're right, and they just leave, but they're actually wrong. And when we appealed that decision, and I appealed it very firmly in terms of how I saw it, in terms of the law, in terms of the reasonable interpretation of the policy and the facts, and they overturned the decision, and we won those ongoing benefits for him.
Well, I know in this particular case, when the client contacted you, he was concerned because it was tens of thousands of dollars and business expenses that he was basically saying, look, I bought this policy to cover my business expenses, and now they're telling me that they don't want to.
Right.
Which was putting him in a position to say, what did I buy? It wasn't so. A lot of times people try to continue their business going, and it will cover the expenses in the hope that maybe they'll get back to work, or maybe they'll be able to prolong the business so they could sell the business, and it will help cover the expenses. But often they get stuck where they have to end up closing down the physical business. But like you were saying, they get stuck with all these other items. So how you talked about being able to do it as an appeal as opposed to not having to file a lawsuit. How were you able to make that happen?
Well, in their decision letter, they offered that as an additional option. Of course, he could have filed a lawsuit if he wanted to. This wasn't a claim where he was required to pursue an appeal, before he could pursue the matter in court. But I felt confident enough, based on what I was seeing with this policy and seeing in terms of the facts, that we should be able to win this. There's never a guarantee you would, but I felt very confident. Either we're winning this now or we're winning this later. And thankfully, Unum saw that our position and our view of how the policy read and the facts in his situation were, and they agreed.
Well, I think it's great that you were able to come to a resolution and make Unum do the right thing here without prolonging what could have been 2 years plus of litigation for what was money that the claimant really needed at that time. Otherwise, he was going to start to have a landlord who was going to come after him
Sure.
or these other creditors, and he was going to have to reach into his pocket to have to pay these people off or have ruin his credit.
Right. And actually, to be clear, I think in his mind, he was hoping maybe, he would feel but well enough, even in those few months after, that he'd be able to go back
Right.
and be able to do it. And I think many people, they hold out that hope as well. Just because he could not afford to keep these things going, he was hoping that there was that small chance that just unfortunately never occurred for him. But ultimately, Unum has continued to pay his individual disability benefits. Hopefully they'll continue to do so. And they haven't given him any issues there. And the max benefits on the business overhead expense, once those are reached, and that's a little different in terms of the individual because usually it's an amount that once that amount's reached or that time period's reached, those benefits end.
Well, it was a great outcome for this chiropractor. If you're someone out there who has a business overhead policy, we always recommend that you reach out to us. We'll give you a free consultation and review of your business overhead disability policy. And no matter where you live in the country, we can assist you and we'll let you know right away how we can help you.